படங்கள் எல்லாரும் எடுத்து அப்புறம் then we can go to the
Devamrita Swami is from New York, in the United States of America. He has a very distinguished academic career. He holds a degree from Yale University. For the last 25 years, he has been a monk, in which time he's travelled extensively and lectured on every continent throughout the world, and also during some of the most turbulent and troublesome times of the 20th century. During the Cold War era in Eastern Europe, he preached behind the Iron Curtain for many, many years, which could easily earn someone a lifetime imprisonment if they are caught. Devamrita Swami is also an author. He has presented 2 books. One is called Perfect Escape, and the next one, his most recent, is called Searching for Baby India. These books are also on display on our book tables outside. Currently, Devamrita Swami travels around the world 3 times a year. He lectures on lifestyle management and developing skills to help free people from stress and anxiety, which is the theme of today's lecture. There will be 2 talks given by Devamrita Swami while he's staying in Melbourne. There is today's lecture, and there is one this evening at 123 Swanson Street, and you're all invited to attend to these talks as well. And there's one also here at the RMIT next Monday, which will be from 12:30 to 2 o'clock, which is dealing with how to control the mind, which is the key to success. So it is my pleasure to invite Devamrita Swami to give today's talk. Thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoy the lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for gathering here this afternoon. Indeed, the subject of stress and anxiety is a very important theme for society today. Because, as I'm sure most of you are aware of, although there has been tremendous external progress in Western society, internally, inside, enormous problems are manifesting. More than what we have seen in previous decades. I became interested in this subject matter due to so much international traveling. I never expected my life would turn out the way it has. I remember my last year at Yale University. Probably many of you know that university system in the USA is different from Australia in that your life is classified according to the particular university you go to. I guess the Yanks get it from England. Like in England, there's Oxford, Cambridge, so in the States, there's Yale and Harvard. So if you go to Yale or Harvard, you're supposed to either become a president or a CEO or something like that. I remember my last month at Yale, I was telling my dean that I wonder about the future of society as it is constructed now. I'm not quite sure, I told him, that I think it's going on in a way that is sustainable. My dean just looked at me, straight in the aisle without blinking, and he said, "You are a Yale man, you will influence the world." I don't think he expected me to try to influence it the way that I'm doing now. But anyway, here I am, after 25 years of international traveling on every continent of the world. And as the person who gave the introduction mentioned, I had some rare opportunities. I spent 9 years organizing underground activities in communist countries, including China, mostly Eastern Europe. Now I'm based in New Zealand. I'm a New Zealand citizen. I tell them I'm a refugee from New York. And I still travel around the world 3 times a year. So that 25 years of international traveling, combined with a lot of study, has given some insight into one of the global themes that are disturbing people these days. Now, I'd like to give you some highlights of some internal problems that I've seen throughout the world. Everywhere, as I'm sure you can understand, there are people who recognize there are some things that need to change. Not simply in their country or the planet, but also in their own personal life. This is a very prominent theme, not only in the developed nations, but it's also starting to happen amongst the fortunate or more well-off persons in developing nations, just like India, for example. In Mumbai, formerly known as Bombay, and in Delhi, those who are educated and affluent are catching the Western bug for trying to understand who are we, why are we here, what are we supposed to be doing. And as you know, in Western countries, in which opulence and economic pursuits have reigned for at least a few centuries, people are feeling trapped in work and party lifestyles that suck away their life energy. Whether you're a university student, then you're coping with the university and party lifestyle. If you're working in an office, or you're in the corporate world, then it's the work lifestyle and wondering how does family life fit in with that. Everywhere I find that so many people are suffering from high-pressure jobs, a lack of time, and social isolation as each individual pursues his or her version of the dream. It's amazing that more than ever before, people are feeling socially isolated, although there's so much communication. The internet, mobile phones, more communication than ever. Yet, more than ever, people are feeling socially isolated. There's more free interaction between the sexes. There's more free interaction amongst the same sex. Yet, still, people are feeling more socially isolated. An intelligent person considers these things and wonders, what's happening? Then there are countless books published every year about how to organize your life, how to manage the time in your life. People try this way, they try that way, but still you can see there's a root of dissatisfaction that is below the surface, and that root of dissatisfaction has not been touched. In this way, a thoughtful person begins to think, how can I make an effective change in my life? Where do I begin? I'll give you some highlights from various countries around the world. Some you might find humorous, others is definitely an element of tragedy. In the USA now, no longer do you find students satisfied with studying one subject matter. In the States they call a major. What do you call it here? Your area of specialty in the university? Anyway, so you can't just study one thing like psychology or business administration. You have to double your student load and specialize in at least two things, and sometimes three things, because the stress is so great in terms of, will I be competitive for the job market in the future? Therefore, the parents are pushing their children. Don't just go to university and study management or psychology. Try to figure out something else to study also, just in case your main field of study is no longer economically viable when you finish university. So maybe you study psychology and you study chemical engineering. And in fact, some are doing three. So that doesn't mean that you take the traditional amount of time you're studying and divide it among two specialties. No, you double and triple the amount of schoolwork that you have. You can understand that this is producing a lot of stress in students. Therefore, when I go around the world, amazingly, so many students come to attend lectures on stress management. Supposedly, students are having a great time. Parties, the wildlife. But evidently, not everyone is satisfied with that. So many students are concerned. What is taking the energy of my life? Then if you go to London, you'll find a very revealing study done of those working in the office in London. While I was passing through recently, I looked at the Financial Times and I found this quite interesting survey of what happens in London offices. I know Australia is different now, so. What they have found is that so much time in the offices in London is spent for wasting time, backstabbing, and sexual advances. I'll read you the statistics. These are official psychological statistics, a reputable survey done of office life in London. 45% of the people would backstab a colleague in order to advance their career. 13% would sleep with the boss for promotion. 36% lied on their CVs. 50% admitted drinking on the job. 33% shared illegal drugs at work. I know Melbourne's different. 62% had been propositioned by a colleague. 20% had sex in the office. 33% viewed pornography on the internet in the office. 28% padded their expense accounts. 42% imagined killing their boss. 48% admitted stealing. The conclusion drawn by the survey was that more or less people will do anything to be on top. There's no holds barred anymore. Well, this is very revealing. Obviously, you can deduce from such statistics that people are in a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress because these activities are the result of anxiety and stress, and they cause more anxiety and stress. Now, if you look at the world globally, you see what many people have termed to be a clash of civilizations. You have the so-called traditional cultures in the Middle East vying against the giants of Western development. Everyone understands that these days it's front page news. Is the situation that simple? We may note that not simply is there a clash between types of civilization going on, but there's also a clash within each civilization. Within so many countries, you'll find that although in some cases there is great economic prosperity, still there is a growing sense of emptiness and despair. Because people don't know why they're living and what they should do. Okay. Now, we were speaking before about if we want to make an effective change in our life, we should begin by understanding our current situation, how we got here. Everyone, I'm sure, is familiar with the process of social enculturation. You're born and you take on so many influences and goals from the people and society around you. You're pushed headlong into economic necessities. You're pushed into entertainment necessities. You're pushed into sensual necessities. So much so that by the time you reach your early 20s, you've already involved yourself in so many pursuits and so many activities that maybe 40 years ago, people would have waited until they were in their mid-20s to even start to think about. You'll find that generally by the age of 19, most students, most young people, whether they're students or working, they've done all the major events of life. They've had plenty of intoxication. They've had plenty of sex. All that's left to do is to travel the world and do those same things in different places. And then to contemplate how to make lots of money to do more of those same things in more comfortable circumstances. And then, after maybe a decade of wildness, by the time they reach 30 or so, they want to settle down in family life. It happens to everyone, for the most part. They want to settle down in family life. And then they have children. It happens to everyone, at least one they have. How do they raise the children? What kind of deep values, what kind of deep purport to life can they pass on to the children? Just do what makes you happy. If you can't be good, be careful. Don't be excessive. Just make your choices based on what pleases you. This is the main parental advice these days. And you can't blame parents for not not being able to say anything more than that. You can imagine what it'll be like when those in the 20s, those who are in their 20s or in their teens now, what happens when they'll be parents in the future? What can they say? So with each generation, the wisdom that parents are able to impart to their children gets less and less and less. Who knows what to say? Except, you gotta get a job, you gotta get some education, you gotta try to live comfortably, you gotta try to be happy in your own way. That's all that can be said these days. So this actually is a conflict within society, within civilization. The old ways have faded. What's to come next? What is going to give the meaning to life? Or is it all just about sensuality and then intoxication to forget the pains of sensuality? Is there anything more? Not being able to answer these questions causes stress and anxiety, especially when people feel that they're doing what everyone else is doing, but where is the satisfaction? It would be different if everyone is just striking out on their own to be complete individuals and ignoring everybody else. That is not happening anywhere in the world. People look around and see what everybody else is doing, and to a degree of 90%, they imitate. And then they find out, where's the deep meaning? Where's the deep experience I'm looking for? It's not there. So this creates a lot of bewilderment, a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress. I'm doing all the things that you're supposed to do in order to enjoy and be successful, but in my heart, I'm so unsatisfied, I'm so filled with anxiety, I can't live without some kind of alcohol, some kind of drug. What am I going to do? There is a deep sense of despair that's setting in internally, even though externally circumstances are nice and tidy. This trend will be the future story of Western society, and it's even happening in developing nations. I just was speaking in India, in Mumbai and Delhi, and those who are affluent, those who are educated, they're just now coming into this same phenomenon. What's it all about? We're pushing away traditional ways of the past. We want to be like the developed nations. But we're noticing that our families are starting to crumble. The youth no longer want to follow the traditional patterns of behavior. What's coming up next? This is a clash within civilization. So I'd like that you fix your vision on both types of clashes. Not simply the clash between, let's say, fundamentalist Islamic culture and Western capitalist culture, but within Western capitalist culture, there are deep psychological problems. An intelligent individual wants to get to the root of all this. Now, what am I going to say that's different? Generally, stress management discussions focus upon 3 levels. One, I'll call the superficial level. You've got stress, you've got anxiety, learn how to breathe deeply. Take a walk in the country, fresh air. Go to the mountains, go to the shore, relax, reduce your working hours. That's the superficial response to stress in life. Such approaches are cosmetic because there is an underlying dissatisfaction that can't be reached just by altering physical circumstances in your life. Then we can proceed to the deeper cause for stress. This is a level that is not very commonly thought about in Western society. The deeper level is that I don't know what is the nature of myself. Therefore, because of ignorance of what my identity is, I'm forced to perform so many activities which actually don't satisfy me. The last time I was at RMIT, I spoke about a section from the ancient Vedic literature, Srimad Bhagavatam. And there, an episode is presented where a 5-year-old boy was asked by his father. His father was a powerful ruler, economically and politically successful. In fact, so successful, he was a dictator. No one would contest anything he said. He had his son, who he's very attached to, and his son was being educated from the age of 5 to follow in the footsteps of the father. The father's name in Sanskrit is Hiranyakashipu. He was proud of his name because his name typified his main delights. Hiranya means gold and Kashipu means soft bed. So the father was very proud of his name, and he wanted that his son follow in those footsteps, gold and soft bed and the pleasure of the soft bed. One day he turned to his son, picking his son up and putting him on his lap, great affection, asked the son, "What is the best thing that you've learned in school?" What do you expect a 5-year-old boy to say? Nothing very profound, nothing very serious. "Oh, I learned how to write my name today," or "I learned the national anthem," or something like that. What the son said totally astonished the father, who was a proud materialist. The son said, "My dear father, O best of the materialists, O most dedicated of the materialists, the greatest thing I've learned in school today is that anyone who thinks they are the body and the mind must always be in anxiety." The father was astonished at hearing such a thing from his son. In fact, he became very angry. He immediately called for the boy's teachers. "Who is polluting my son with this non-materialistic information? What teacher in the school is dare suggesting to my son that he's something more than matter? Who is ruining my son's future?" Now let's think about what this 5-year-old boy said. It's becoming a very hot issue in knowledge today. What is consciousness? Consciousness studies all over the world, that subject matter at universities is becoming very trendy. Suddenly, Western people are understanding. We do not know the very thing that allows us to know. We don't know what it is. We have no knowledge of consciousness, and it is consciousness that makes us aware of everything. So how can we say we understand anything if we do not understand the thing that lets us be aware of everything? Now, according to the ancient knowledge of India, the reason why there is no understanding of consciousness is because consciousness is the symptom of something non-material. Now, I'll tell you factually, you can go all over the world and you'll see this is true. There is not one scientific instrument in the whole world that can directly detect the presence of consciousness. All you have to go on for understanding that you are a conscious person is your own subjective experience. Oh, I feel like I'm aware. I feel like I'm a person. I feel like I'm conscious. That's it. There's no scientific, no technological device for verifying that consciousness exists. According to the ancient Vedic knowledge of India, consciousness is such a riddle because consciousness is the energy of the spirit soul, the non-material self. This issue of whether the self is material or non-material is going to become the biggest game in town. Honest scientists will say, we don't know. Convinced materialist scientists will say, even though we can't prove it, we are adamantly sure that we're just matter. There's nothing more to us than that. And then there's the other side. There are many intelligent scientists who will say, there has to be something non-material about our identity. This is going to become the crux of debate in the future of Western society, because the stress and the emptiness is getting to such a level that people are being pressed to ask that question. What is the nature of myself? Because maybe I'm having all this stress and anxiety because I'm trying to fulfill a person that I'm not. If I'm not matter, then why should I think matter will satisfy me? Maybe I'm something else. Maybe my identity is non-material, and therefore I have to turn to non-material methods for satisfying this non-material self. This is a very important point. We can save ourselves a lot of trouble. We can get beyond stress and anxiety if we don't run away from it, but actually meet head on this issue of, am I a materialistic entity, meaning I'm just matter, or am I a non-material entity? I am something spiritual. Now, surprisingly, when I go all over the world and I bring this point up, at least 70% of the people in Western societies, in India it'll be 90%, they all say, yes, yes, we know we're spiritual. What does that mean, though? Most people have no idea what it means that they're saying they are spiritual. Most people who say that, they have some kind of idea that, well, I must be both the body, matter, I must be something mysterious, some spiritual thing also. There's a lack of precise understanding of the self that's at the root of all anxiety and stress. Therefore, what that 5-year-old boy was saying, that's very, very important. Anyone who misidentifies as the body, thinking, I am this body, I am the mind, they have to be in anxiety. Because just by misidentifying as matter, you base your whole life in trying to satisfy yourself materially. And that can't be done. So now you have Western capitalist societies which are externally so successful, but internally there's all sorts of problems going on. These problems are forcing us to either, one, go deeper into intoxication and forget about it all. Many people choose that. You yourselves know that so many people cannot live without some kind of intoxication. When they become intoxicated, then they can forget the problems of life. But others want to go another direction. Those are the persons who I'm hoping to reach today. Others are willing to think, maybe I've got it all wrong. Maybe I've got to reprogram my life and make a spiritual solution. Now, often when people say spiritual, they don't know what they mean. They just think it must mean something different. Everybody uses the word spiritual these days. Athletes, sports stars use it. Yeah, when I went in for the try, it was a spiritual experience. Everyone's got a spiritual girlfriend or boyfriend. It's just, the word means everything to everyone. What actually is spiritual? Even traditional religions have a hard time giving a concise definition of what is spiritual. Because you'll find that the understanding that I'm not this body is missing, or it's not clearly presented. More accurately, I would say, it's not clearly presented in traditional religions of the Judeo-Christian culture, Islamic culture also. Not a clear presentation of, am I this body, am I matter, or am I something else? This clarity that is India's great gift to the world. Right from the very beginning, for example, in the classic Vedic text Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna explains that the problems, the stress, and anxiety in life are coming from our misidentifying with the body as the self. Thinking, I'm this body, therefore let me spend my whole life trying to satisfy the body. Then if people are a little more subtle, they're thinking, I'm the mind. Now, according to the knowledge given in Bhagavad Gita, according to the Krishna conscious knowledge in Bhagavad Gita, the mind is a subtle version of the body. Bhagavad Gita will teach you that the body is a gross covering and the mind is a subtle covering, but neither are the real self. Therefore, the real self cannot be satisfied either grossly or subtly. We've got to go in another direction altogether. If we want to find the most comprehensive way for satisfying the life, we must get comprehensive knowledge of what the self is and how to satisfy the spiritual self. Then we'll get beyond stress and anxiety. But as long as we're thinking I'm something that I'm not, we're going to spend our whole life going in the wrong direction. And there's so much energy being spent in the wrong direction. Everyone can understand that. If we just clean up our lifestyles a bit and give ourselves a chance to think, that's very hard for a lot of people today. A lot of people keep themselves so busy that they'll never have the time or clarity to focus on what is their identity. Work, 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 study, 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 as you mentioned earlier, not even studying one specialty, but 2 or 3. You've got to keep competitive to make sure you can hold your own in the job market. Once you land a job, you're in anxiety. Will I keep the job? For example, today is Friday. One of my students in Melbourne, spiritual students, he's a corporate administrator, corporate executive at an industrial corporation. And he tells me the time for laying people off, terminating people, is Friday. Why? Because by cutting down their staff on Fridays, there's the weekend. And that means 2 days without work. So the outcry throughout the offices won't be as great as if they did it on Monday or Tuesday, when there's several days before the weekend for all the other people in the office to get worked up. How could they let him go? How could they finish him off? He's been with the company for 20 years. So they do it on Friday. And they do it in the morning. As soon as, and this happens to middle-level managers. We're not talking about factory workers. We're talking about middle-level managers who have been with the company for 20 and 25 years. I'm telling you what goes on right in Melbourne. So most of you know. They call the person in first thing in the morning when he gets to work at 9 o'clock. Mr. Chalmers, can you please step into the office of your department head? Mr. Chalmers comes in, and they tell him, I'm sorry, we no longer can afford to have your services. You've got 10 minutes to pack up your things and go. Can you do it in 10 minutes? If not, we can have somebody help you pack up your Why do they say that? Because everything is computerized these days, so they're afraid if the guy goes back to his office and spends too much time, he's going to get on the computer system and wreck the whole system throughout the factory. So they're very careful to specify. You've got 10 minutes to pack your things and go home. This is what is done to someone who has worked for 25 years at a middle management level. So this person was telling me that he's seen men who are 45 and 50 years old go through this experience after 25 years with the company. He's seen them emerge from that office crying and unable to drive themselves home, just shattered completely. Every week, he says, he watches this happen, as every week someone gets downsized. Obviously, this is very stressful. Just think, a man, a woman, there are also women managers in middle management, of course. They leave home in the morning, the kids go off to school, you come driving to your corporate job, and then half hour later you're turned around to go back home. And you gotta wait at home to tell your wife or husband and kids, I don't have a job anymore with the company. It shatters people. But this is a normal thing that's going on these days. So people don't know what to trust anymore. Where do we put our faith in? Where do we put our convictions in? Just the normal things of society aren't working anymore. You can't base your whole life on them anymore. This is the kind of inner despair that's creeping in. Now, these times are an opportunity. Because the traditional beliefs in society and the traditional sources of assurance are fading, this is a golden opportunity for those who can be motivated in these times to seek a different solution. You're going to have to be a brave person, though. You're going to have to be a bit of a hero. How to, amidst these circumstances of what seems to be chaos and lack of assurance, lack of security, how can you use that energy to get to a real benefit for yourself? You can use this energy of insecurity and lack of assurance to analyze, what is myself? Maybe I'm living an illusion. So many people have seen the movie Matrix. So now is a good time. You can ask yourself, do I choose the red pill or the blue pill? Do I want to just forget the problems of the day, forget the problems of the self, and act like it's not happening? Intoxication will allow you to do that. You can start accumulating material goods, accumulating relationships like you accumulate consumer goods. Or you can take the other pill and say, I'm going to use the energy of today, this energy of insecurity and lack of assurance. I'm going to use it for a positive purpose, to challenge my conceptions of myself. What am I? Those kind of persons will thrive these days. They will thrive on the chaos. They'll thrive on the uncertainty because they're willing to take that uncertainty and insecurity and shape it for positive gain. Okay, since everything around me is uncertain and insecure, then why don't I just accept that I'm uncertain and insecure about who I am and what I am? Those kind of persons will forge a new path for themselves, blaze a new trail. Naturally, I'm here to recommend that you should blaze the trail in the direction of the non-material nature of the self. Because then, naturally, you'll become interested in non-material pleasure and non-material ways of satisfying the self. That is the ancient Vedic contribution from India that can do so much good for the world. That is what Krishna consciousness is about. understanding your non-material identity, and then finding non-material methods of pleasure. This is the knowledge that is most missing in society today, whether it's a traditional fundamentalist culture of the Middle East or the advanced Western economies and democracies of the West. No one has experience or understanding of non-material pleasure. Therefore, people feel forced to resort to the same old material so-called pleasures, even though they're not satisfied, and they get so stressed out trying to accumulate the traditional material so-called pleasures. Hence, what I'm actually proposing to you all is a big shift. But a shift that is not unjustified, a shift that is not far-fetched, but a shift that will put you right on the cutting edge of the future. If I am not matter as an identity, why should I think that matter will satisfy me? This is actually the deep message of Krishna consciousness. What is the way that the spirit self enjoys? Everyone is interested in pleasure. Now, how do I find stress-free, anxiety-free pleasure? I have to go to the spiritual plane. How do you go to the spiritual plane? I'll close by giving some hints. We have to find the source of all energy, the source of matter and spirit, and put our energies at that source. Focus upon that source. We like the source as known by the term Krishna, because Krishna means the reservoir of all pleasure. From the source comes matter. From the source comes the spiritual energy. If we can tune into the source somehow, then our striving for pleasure will be successful. But as long as we cut ourselves off from the ultimate source of everything, then we'll struggle this way, that way, trying to get pleasure out of temporary things, illusory things, and we'll be in anxiety and stressed out. And what will be the solution? I have a brother who's a Harvard law graduate, as well, his wife is also, and they're corporate lawyers. So they both get home about 9 p.m. at night after 12-hour workday. And so she's very stressed and full of anxiety. And my brother, he doesn't know what to do. All he can tell her is, her name is Arlene. Arlene, let go. Let go. And she just kind of looks at her like, I'm kind of relying on you for a bit more than that. You know? That's all my brother knows how to do. Maybe he's read in some, self-help book or something like that. He just looks at her, Arlene, let go. Whatever it is, let go. And she just gets even more anxiety because she knows this is not going to work. She just can't let go because she's caught in a matrix of complexity, and she doesn't know anything else than this matrix of complexity. So you just can't tell her to let go. You've got to teach her that she's something different from all this, and that she should be getting her satisfaction in a different way. Of course, my brother can't do that. So she's stressed, and he tells her, let go. And then he gets stressed because she's not letting go. So they both end up being stressed. So that this way they pass their days and nights. Materially, my brother is very successful. He and his wife live in the condominium. He's got his Mercedes-Benz. But internally, he and his wife is suffering so much. He wants a child, and she doesn't want any children. Children are going to destroy my career. No kids. My brother comes from a traditional family. He had 4 brothers and sisters, so he wants to have a happy home. But having a happy home means she has to give birth. She doesn't want to give birth because it's going to ruin her career, so that increases the stress even more. Beyond his desire and her desire, what you're seeing is two different world views. They don't even recognize it like that, my brother and his wife. He doesn't understand that he's got a certain vision. He's got a certain vision based on his expectations, and she's got another vision. So the last I heard, what she did to save the marriage was, one day my brother came home from the office, and parked in the garage was a brand new, bright red Mercedes-Benz. And so his wife told him, just see what I bought you, here's your baby. So my brother was quite happy for a couple of months with his baby. But then, once again, after 2 months, he was demanding from her, I want a real baby. So that's the last I heard from a few months ago. This is the kind of thing that's happening. In fact, things much more acute and much more worrisome go on. So much so that as I travel down to Australia, I go to Perth, Melbourne, Brisbane. Everyone tells me that if there is marriage in Australia, then there must be something called, for short in Aussie slang, the prenup. You've got to make a prenuptial agreement that if you do marry, whatever assets you bring to the marriage will remain with the person who brought them to the marriage in the unlikely event that there's divorce. It shows how much people are in anxiety about how to cope with uncertainty. They're recognizing there's a good chance that this marriage won't work. In fact, there's more than a 50% chance. Therefore, we got to sign a prenuptial agreement so that any money and assets that I bring to the marriage won't go to you if we break up, even though we love each other right now. Just think of all the complexity that people have to put up with today, just to satisfy the body and mind. Now, I propose a radical, it's not radical, it's common sense. I propose a common sense solution to all this anxiety and stress about uncertainty. Let's put our energies into understanding the nature of the self. I'm here to say that the self is non-material. The self is spiritual, and that we can get the most comprehensive understanding of that spirit self through the Krishna conscious techniques as presented in the ancient Vedic knowledge of India. Now, I'll just leave that with you for you to think about and pursue in your own way. Hopefully, I've given you some points that you'll find valuable and take with you, and maybe you have some information for looking at the problems of today in a different way. Remember, don't just look for the clash between civilizations, those represented by Iraq or Iran and those represented by the USA and the UK. Look even within those individual societies for the clashes going on, as people are feeling internal breakup because of stress, anxiety, uncertainty, and emptiness. And then think, perhaps the solution is that everyone's barking up the wrong tree, everyone's driving down the wrong street because they have no proper information about what is the self. The self is non-material, the self is spiritual, so we have to find spiritual methods for enjoyment. That will be the turning point for society. So, thank you very much. I'll just ask if there are any questions. Yes.
எடுக்கலாமா இது எடுக்கலாமா
Spiritual methods are
We can keep it outside.
excitement.
outside
Up the ante a bit. I said spiritual methods of more. And obviously, being a person, being an individual, is such a painful thing. That means the supreme can't be a person, because person automatically means suffering. Individuality automatically means pain. So people get this bright idea that individuality and personality automatically means limitation and suffering, and that impersonal, that would mean bliss. But this is not the conclusion given in the Vedic knowledge of ancient India. The Vedic knowledge of ancient India points out
the distribution.
போதுமா
போகலாம் முடியுது
இல்லை இது எடுத்துச்சு ஓரளவுக்கு
போகிறோம் that's all.
This could easily earn one a jail sentence during that period of time. Devamrita is also an author. He's produced 2 books, Perfect Escape and Searching for Vedic India. These books are on display in our table we have outside here. Currently, Devamrita Swami travels around the world 3 times a year and lectures on lifestyle management, giving people skills and education about how to become free of stress and anxiety. So today's discourse, as you know, is about controlling the mind, which is a very important aspect to being successful in every aspect of everyday living. So thank you for coming today. Could I just request that when you do leave the lecture this afternoon, if you could exit through these doors out here, because we have a small gift to give to everybody before you leave. So I hope you enjoyed today's lecture. Thank you.
3 days here at RMIT. I spoke Friday at Story Hall, and now we're back again at the Casey Theatre. Actually, I hope to go a bit deeper into what may be troubling us. I don't know, any of you, were you here Friday when we spoke at Story Hall? Anyone? Can you raise your hand, please? All right, that's a good percentage. We spoke Friday about stress, anxiety, and emptiness. How in spite of material comfort and convenience in developed nations, as I go around the world, which I do quite regularly for the past 25 years, I see that more and more there's a great paradox becoming obvious. And as students, you'll be grappling with that paradox now and increasingly more so when you finish school. These days, there's not much argument about the purpose of education. Most people will readily agree that education should lead to economic enhancement. Maybe 30, 40 years ago, there would have been a debate that education is supposed to develop higher qualities in you, develop better character. There's a little bit of buzz about that going on now, but not much. For the most part, everyone expects that what they study at the university should lead to increased economic reward. Not only that, but if you're a real mover and shaker, you expect that where you go to school will enhance your future connections. I don't know how much that prevails in Australia. In the States and the UK, it's definitely like that. For example, as most of you know, if you go to Yale University or Harvard University, that's the equivalent of going to Oxford or Cambridge in the UK. And then not only do you get your prestige from attending such a place, but you also get a lifetime's worth of connections. So, what is the relation of education to understanding what the self is? If you can understand what the self is, then you have a great hope to control your mind. You might be surprised to know that there is no scientific or technological agreement about what is the self. In fact, there's no scientific agreement about what is consciousness. I was explaining Friday the plain fact that there's not one single technological instrument in the world which can directly detect the presence of consciousness. This means we have a huge gap in our understanding of the self. And without that gap filled, how can we have a life that is free from anxiety and stress? We really don't know who we're dealing with. And this is the question that everyone is being trained today to run away from. Don't take the time to think about who you are. I'm going to come at you from the perspective of the ancient knowledge of India, which states that first you have to understand what you are, and then you can establish your mission in life. Every important enterprise needs a mission statement, and you'll find that out once you enter the working world. Not only that, but individuals are also encouraged to have a mission statement for their life. Now, how can you decide what is your mission unless you have a clear understanding of what you are? The mind is a very mysterious thing. There have been great medical breakthroughs in understanding the body, and there are also medical breakthroughs in understanding the effects of pharmaceuticals on what is known as the mind, but generally people cannot distinguish between the brain and the mind, because who has seen a mind? Okay, you all know all that, being bright students at RMIT. But I want to go at things from a different angle, because I'm sure you want to hear a different angle. I'll tell you the perspective of the ancient Vedic knowledge from India, which will teach you that just like you have a physical body, you also have a subtle body, or an astral body. And the astral body is composed of mind, intelligence, and false ego. In Bhagavad Gita, those of you who are familiar with the ancient text Bhagavad Gita, this is clearly explained by Krishna in Bhagavad Gita. Now, is this concept really far-fetched? Is it just some kind of mythology? I was just reading a survey taken at Oxford University in the UK, in which 30% of the students there said they had some kind of out-of-body experience in which they felt they were traveling as a mind outside their body. So this means that this idea of the mind as a body is not at all so far-fetched. Many of you are aware about NDEs, near-death experiences. Now, there's no doubt a lot of reports about near-death experiences are not scientifically precise enough that you all would want to accept them without a doubt. But there are quite a few cases of near-death experiences which hold up scientifically. In other words, everything has been corroborated, everything has been verified. How is it that a person with no medical knowledge, who's supposed to be clinically dead, and the medical instruments show the person is clinically dead, their brain has ceased to act, and that person can feel himself or herself floating above the body, which is lying on the operating table. That person can feel himself or herself floating above the body, looking down at the body, and then can give an accurate report later about everything the doctors were doing, even though that person has no medical knowledge. So there are scientific reports about this which cannot be explained away. Everything is well documented. The person felt that I'm in a mental body and I'm looking down at my physical body, and the person later was able to give complete descriptions of what the doctors were doing. And that person had no prior medical training or understanding. So these things are happening, and they give us a good indication that the mind exists as an entity. Now, what is the nature of the mind in relation to ourself? That is even a greater mystery. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna describes that first you start with the gross level, your physicality. Then you get more subtle, the mind. More subtle than the mind is your intelligence. And beyond the intelligence, the most subtle material thing is false ego. What is the false ego? It's the thing that compels you to identify with matter. Now, who is identifying with matter? That, Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita, is the spirit soul, the non-material entity. By the virtue of having a false ego, identifies with matter, and this is where all the problems begin and end. Why is that? If I think that I am matter, and matter can satisfy me, I'll make my mission like that. But if I'm not matter, then how can matter satisfy me? So it's very important to understand what the mind does in terms of our satisfaction and dissatisfaction. Now, I want you to pause for a moment and do an exercise briefly. It'll take a few seconds. And we'll go back to this exercise near the end. And what would I be doing? So now, please help me give this discussion by daydreaming for 10 seconds. Just think, where do I really want to be more than anywhere else right now? And who do I want to be with? And what do I want to be doing? Maybe you want to be in Cairns on the beach. Maybe you want to be in Hawaii, and you want to be surrounded by your friends, your partner, whatever. You can feel the velocity of the mind in running towards this situation that you're daydreaming about. Now, you might be surprised to know that great mystic yogis in India can use the power of that mental velocity to go places. This concept is a bit alien to Western science, that you can travel in your mind. But once again, please take into account that 30% of the students at Oxford University report that they've had some kind of OBE, out-of-body experience. And there is the undeniable evidence of near-death experiences in which the physical body is seen to be totally finished, no brain activity, yet the person reports being outside the body and is able to see everything that's happening to the gross body. In this way, I hope you can see it's not so far-fetched that trained mystic yogis can travel in their mind from one place to another. Just like when you're daydreaming about being in Cairns or Darwin, you're traveling. You just think about the beach, you're gone, you're there. Now, perhaps for you, that mental impression is not strong. You say, well, when I'm really physically at the beach, I feel the hot sun, I feel the water, there's no doubt I'm there. But in my mind, it's just a faint impression of being at the beach with my partner. I'm sure you've all had the experience of thinking intensely of being with your partner, and things go on in your mind. You can feel things with your mind, but it's just not the same as being there in the flesh. You might be surprised to know that persons with psychic power can make that mental experience, that mental feeling, as strong as the physical feeling. It just takes some training. All right, why am I explaining this to you? Do I want you to daydream? No. I just want you to have some idea of the power of the mind. In the ancient text Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains that the mind can be your best enemy, and the mind can be your best friend. Best enemy meaning worst enemy, and the mind can be your best friend according to how you treat the mind. So what is the mind doing constantly? It's accepting things and rejecting things. You can catch your mind doing this all day long and all night. 1 minute you're thinking, oh, this is nice. The next minute you're thinking, oh, this is not so nice. 1 minute, I want this. The next minute, I don't know if I want this. This is the nature of the mind. It perpetually fluctuates between accepting something and rejecting something. Now, how can we be satisfied when this mind is flickering so much? You may have had experiences sometimes of being completely physically comfortable. Your body has everything that you want the body to have. Maybe you're at the beach, the sun is warm, it's not too hot. The sand is warm, but not too hot. There's even a gentle breeze blowing, and your body feels good. But because you have mental anxiety, you cannot be completely at peace. I'm sure all of you have had that experience. When your body is completely comfortable, but something is worrying you, and therefore your whole holiday is spoiled, or you cannot get the pure contentment that you want, even though your body is so comfortable. You could be cohabiting with your partner, and your physicality is completely absorbed in the activity, but your mind is worried about something, and you can't get your mind off what it's worried about. This shows you that you can have all the luxuries and conveniences around you, but if your mind is filled with anxiety, then there'll be no peace for you. So, what to do about this mind? How can we actually make the mind our friend? those who are going to be successful in their life don't simply look to have a comfortable physical body. They are also concerned with how to have a peaceful mind. Now, you can look at the mind, according to the ancient perspective of India, you can look at the mind to be like a repository of all kinds of stimulations, pleasant and unpleasant. The mind's like a warehouse, and all these sensations and perceptions enter into the warehouse and are stored there. So this is why sometimes you feel that your mind is just like a swirling cloud of all kinds of thoughts and perceptions. And when your mind feels like it's really out of control, you're just bouncing between this idea, this emotion, that emotion, this feeling, that feeling. What is supposed to rule the mind? In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains that the intelligence is supposed to rule the mind. Most people do not know how to do this. Most people do not know how to use their intelligence to guide their mind. Therefore, people are easy victims for whatever stimulation comes their way. You know what that feels like. You're walking down the street, maybe it's right outside here, and you're thinking about one thing, and then some stimulation hits you. You see an advert, or you see a friend, or you see someone who's a desirable sense object for you, and immediately your mind is affected, and you can't even control it. Why? Because the strength of the intelligence is not developed. How to develop strong intelligence? That can only be done by discipline. Just like those who want to be successful in physical activity, like athleticism, they discipline their bodies. Similarly, those who want to be successful in mental activities discipline their mind. If you can discipline both the body and the mind and get them under control, then you can understand that there's something non-material about you. But as long as the body and mind are out of control and they're just subject to whatever stimulation comes their way, there'll never be the clarity in our life for understanding our spiritual identity. What I am suggesting is that there is a purpose for controlling our mind and controlling our body. This is almost forgotten knowledge these days. What most people feel is the prevalent notion that the more your senses are open to whatever comes their way, the more your mind is open to whatever comes its way, the more a full life you'll have. So, as soon as we hear about anything resembling restraint of the mind and senses, we get a bit rebellious. Oh, this is old-fashioned stuff. Everybody knows if you want to be satisfied, just let your mind and senses do whatever they want. No, it doesn't work like that. And you can make that experiment yourself. If you like, you can go through a period of your life in which you let your mind and senses do whatever comes their way. Maybe some of you have tried that. You don't have to answer. But there's a lot of social pressure to do that. Just, whatever happens, happens. Don't discriminate. Just feel good and help others feel good. And just go with the flow, whatever happening. Try it for a while and see what happens. You'll see that you become frustrated and overwhelmed by a feeling of emptiness. And you also lose your sense of self-respect and self-dignity. Now try the other way. Try to use discrimination and intelligence in terms of how you use the tools of your life, your mind and your senses. then you'll start to be able to compose yourself enough to start thinking deeply about what is the self. Am I matter or am I something else? Okay, what is the scientific position today about the nature of the self? There's no fixed position. You have basically three groups. You have those who are dyed-in-the-wool materialists. There's nothing but matter. The self is simply matter. Consciousness is an emanation from matter. Somehow they're finding movements of the brain cells. Consciousness emanates. There's no proof of this, but we know it's to be true because everything is matter. So that's the hardcore materialist camp. And then, on the other side, there are scientists who say it is impossible that consciousness can arise from matter. We have to accept that there is some other kind of energy at work in the cosmos which is non-material. That's the other camp. And then in between are the Mysterians. They say, we'll never know the answer. The answer is beyond science. We'll just have to understand that we'll never understand what is the self. Certain things are just beyond the reach of science, and that's just the way it is. All right. I'm giving you today knowledge from the camp that says consciousness, the conscious self, is non-material. And I want to present that frustration and dissatisfaction and anxiety comes when we do not have a controlled mind enough for perceiving our spiritual identity. Now, let's go a little bit further. I didn't plan to do this, but I think we'll give it a try. Reincarnation is very popular these days. Many people joke in a casual way that, oh, in my last life I must have been a singer because I like to sing now. Or I must have been a dolphin in my past life because I can't stay away from the beach, or something like that. You know? People joke in that way, and it's not far-fetched anymore. Everybody has entertained some thought about, have I been here before? Whether I'm getting a feeling of deja vu or whatever. It's quite common these days that people are willing to consider that they've had many lives. Now, the ancient Vedic knowledge of India, you'll find in Bhagavad Gita, teaches that according to your state of mind at the time of death, you get your next body. So if you want to find the engine of reincarnation, you look at the state of mind. Now, you're not the mind, according to the standard of Krishna's teachings in Bhagavad Gita, but you're possessing the mind just like you possess clothes. Just like now, I have an outer shirt, and then underneath, I have an inner shirt. So the gross body, Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita, is the outer shirt. And the mental body is the inner shirt, but neither are me. That's why we cannot be satisfied simply by absorbing ourselves in physical and mental stimulations. I think you've all tried to do that at some point or another, and you know, you get burned out, you get frustrated. It looks attractive at first, especially in the student years. You just dive head first into physical and mental stimulations of all types. And you know what happens after a few years. You get burned out, you get frustrated. So, that frustration must be there because you cannot be satisfied by devoting so much effort to the coverings. You have to get to the person that's covered. Now, even though the mind is not us, it plays a central role in our changing bodies. And this is what Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita. He explains that according to your state of mind at the time of death in your previous life, you get an appropriate body in this life. So the consciousness that you have at the time of death is like a very important examination, because according to what that consciousness is at the time of death, you're going to get your next body. In other words, a human body is not guaranteed. If you look around, if you go to the Melbourne Zoo, I did that a few months ago. I went to the zoo in Melbourne, and you'll see all varieties of creatures. Obviously, they're not as smart as human beings, but many of them have the same basic existence as a human being. I remember I came first to where the orangutans are. And if you've seen orangutans before, you know to human beings, they look funny. So I was laughing at the orangutans. What strange creatures. And they started looking at me, and one picked up a piece of wood and threw it at me. How dare you laugh at me just because I have this kind of body? Yes, we could take that kind of body in our next life. According to the Vedic vision of ancient India, all forms of life are available for you to take that kind of body. Trees, plants, fish, orangutans, cats, dogs, human beings. You take a certain body in your next life according to your state of mind at the time of death. If your mind at the time of death at least has had some habit of thinking, what am I? What is the ultimate goal of life? Then you get a human body. But if your mind at the time of death is simply absorbed in physical stimulation, then you get an animal type of body in which you don't have the advanced consciousness for listening to a discussion like we have now. So the key to dealing with the mind is to understand that you got to get on top of it. You can't get under it. As soon as you become under the influence of the mind, then you're dragged here and there by this feeling, this thought, that thought, and this way your whole life passes. But if you can get on top of the mind, if you can get on top of all these perceptions and stimulations and thoughts, then you can control the mind, and in fact, you can use the power of the mind for taking you places. Now, where do you want to go? Do you simply want to develop psychic powers and travel in your mind? These things aren't so far-fetched, by the way. I can give you documentation to show you that the CIA spent a few $1 million paying remote viewers. That means people who have the psychic ability of being able to sit in one place and then see exactly what's going on the other side of the world. So, these people were paid to sit in a place in California, at some CIA place, and then write down exactly what they saw was happening in hostile parts of the world. And they did that. And the CIA was paying them several $1 million to get this kind of information. So you see the contradiction that's going on today. On the one hand, some people laugh at all this kind of stuff. Oh, this psychic stuff, all this hooey, all this occult stuff. They don't teach that in a university. On the other hand, you have governments paying millions of dollars to try these things out. This is going on. So, what we are suggesting is not that you use the power of your mind for remote viewing to see what North Korea is really doing at their nuclear production sites. No, we're suggesting you use the power of your mind for focusing upon the highest subject matter. What is the highest subject matter? Understanding yourself as consciousness and understanding the supreme consciousness. When your mind focuses in that way, it can act as a wonderful instrument for relieving you from anxiety and positively for connecting you to real pleasure. So the battlefield is really the mind. I know everyone's generally concerned about their body. Is my body healthy? Is my body good looking? Does my body feel good? But as I already explained to you, you can have all the correct situations for your body. You can be so comfortable and have everything you want for your body, but if there's mental worry, if there's mental anxiety, then everything is spoiled. So, if you can get on top of your mind and use the energy of your mind for focusing on the most satisfying goal of life, then it's very easy to get all aspects of your life in order. But if you neglect the power of the mind and just let the mind go here and there, you'll always be a victim. And I think some of you had that kind of experience before, of being a victim of your own mind. You were forced to think things that now you are embarrassed about. When you think that, how could I have ever thought that? I must have been nuts. I'm sure many of you had that experience. One day you're feeling one way, and then something happens, some stimulation hits your mind, and your whole thinking process changes. You don't have to take some kind of pharmaceuticals to make that happen. It can just happen in the course of everyday life. Some impression hits your mind, and your whole life changes its course. Therefore, we should be very motivated to get on top of our mind and see how we can use the mind as an instrument for enlightenment. But we don't want to make the mistake of thinking the mind is the everything. Many people have this problem about psychic powers. I don't know if any of you here have tried to develop psychic powers. You all know about people like Uri Geller, who can bend a spoon with his mind. This goes on, it's undeniable. Uri Geller has the ability to do amazing things just with his mind. You can't do that. If you pick up a spoon and try to bend it with your mind, it's not going to happen. But some people think it's strange. Nevertheless, Uri Geller now has a multi-million-dollar corporation in which the petroleum industry pays him to use his mind to go around the world and find new oil sources. So here again you have the contradiction. Well, this sounds strange, occult. It sounds very, a bit spooky, but meanwhile, someone's making millions of dollars paid by Shell and Exxon to use his mental powers to go around the world and find new oil sources. So, you have better things to do with your mind, and even the development of these mental or psychic powers will not satisfy you. Because the mind is material. Although it's more subtle than the gross body, still the mind is matter. If we are all going to be satisfied, we've got to get to the anti-material substance. Then there can be hope for peace. Right now, everyone knows that the world has some hot spots, and people are very distressed. Why should there be war? Why should there be strife? This war and strife propensity in human beings comes from an unsatisfied mind. When your mind is agitated because of your own lack of satisfaction, you reach out to blame others. You strike out at others, when actually the problem is within your own mind. So if we're going to see any movement towards world peace, then there has to be a movement towards mental satisfaction. Actually, hope for having a satisfied mind, you'll commit suicide, without a doubt. If you cannot see that there is any chance for mental contentment just for a few moments of the day, you'll commit suicide. It's so painful. I don't know if any of you have ever come near such an experience in which You were so mentally distraught. You were so full of anxiety. You didn't see one hope for having a few moments of flickering mental contentment. That's when you consider suicide. It's the most painful thing to have. Not a painful body, but a painful mind. A painful mind means I don't see even the slightest opportunity for some kind of mental contentment or satisfaction. This is why it's so important to be able to control the mind. But controlling the mind by material methods will not last. I know you've all heard, as we were discussing Friday, how people sometimes in answer to their painful minds will do deep breathing, or they'll go for a walk in the country, or some kind of superficial way to get rid of stress. These things are temporary. These measures don't get to the root of the problem. The root of the problem is that we're not aware of our spiritual identity, the non-material self. If you can understand yourself as non-material, that means not gross matter and not subtle matter, then you can bypass the whole problem of the mind. You get on top of it with something superior. Now, the easiest way to get on top of your mind and get into something superior is through sound vibration. Briefly, you heard before I was speaking, something about the power of mantra. This word mantra is a Sanskrit word which means something which has the power to take your mind away from the inferior and attach it to the superior. That is the meaning of mantra. Sound plays such an important role in our mental stability. You all have had the experience of how you could be in a place where there was some very disturbing sound. Just like if someone takes their fingernails and scratches on a chalkboard. It's a very disturbing sound. So, that sound upsets you. It puts your mind on edge. But similarly, there are sounds which make your mind relax. The ancient Vedic knowledge of India will tell you that besides there being sounds that make your mind relax, there are also sounds that can transform your mind from material identification to the spiritual reality. In other words, we can look at the success in our life in a different way. We can look at our life in terms of what kind of sounds is my life in contact with. If your life is simply in contact with matter sounds, sounds about the physical and mental realms, then you're going to be on edge, you're going to be stressed, you're going to be in anxiety. Because if your identity is non-material, simply being bombarded with material sounds will really disturb you. We've heard of air pollution, water pollution, but I'm presenting sound pollution. That the quality of the sound that goes in your ear determines what kind of quality of existence you have. So, if all day long you're hearing sounds that tell you, you are the body, you are the mind, satisfy your body, satisfy your mind, you're going to end up being very stressed out. Even if you try to act on those messages, and if you act on them successfully, still you won't be satisfied. Why? Because there's something else about you that cannot be described in terms of gross matter and subtle matter. But let's go to the other side. If you hear sounds that stimulate your spiritual awakening, that stimulate your non-material understanding of the self, then you may see a different effect altogether. In fact, you may experiment and find that by using the proper sound you get a completely different experience of who you are and what is your situation in this world. That is why we began this lecture with a short demonstration of the Maha Mantra, the Hare Krishna mantra, known in India as the great sound vibration for deliverance from not only material anxiety and stress, but also deliverance from the complete misconception that I am this body, I am this mind. By hearing the right kind of sound, you can become established in your non-material identity. Just think about the power of sound again. When you're sleeping in the morning and you gotta go to class, I don't know what's your earliest class. When I was at Yale, I made sure I didn't have classes before 11 a.m., because then I could get up at 10:15. I'm sure you're better students, and you're up at 6 in the morning studying. In any case, even though I got up at 10 in the morning, I still had to use an alarm clock. And so, when the sound of the alarm clock goes into the ear, you wake up and you immediately begin to think of what the duties are that you have to do during the day. When you hear spiritual sound, when you hear the Hare Krishna mantra, then you wake up from your illusion of thinking, I am this body, I am this mind, I have to satisfy the body, I have to satisfy the mind, and you begin to remember your spiritual activities. You are awakened from the slumber of material ignorance and misidentification. And then you begin to remember, why should I struggle so hard in this world of matter simply to satisfy the gross body and the subtle mind when that's not me? Now, usually when I get to this point and start suggesting that we have other obligations to ourselves besides physical and mental, some people get a little edgy. All right, are you trying to say that we're supposed to drop our studies, drop our jobs, drop our families, drop the world, and just kind of tune out and be in some kind of spiritual state? Is that what you're trying to suggest? No, not at all. I'm in this world with you. We may have different lifestyles, but still, I'm in this world with you. Why might there be a different lifestyle? Well, I'll tell you a secret. Why did I take up the lifestyle I'm doing now? Simply because I was greedy for pleasure. In my last year at university, when most of my classmates were contemplating, when they would be president of the USA or when they would be CEO of IBM. That's what most Yale graduates end up doing. I was thinking, well, as far as I can see, people are trying for pleasure. I feel that my goal in life is to contact the greatest possible pleasure at every moment. And I don't see how that is possible by identifying as the body and mind and acting to satisfy the body and mind. So therefore, my career choice is how to obtain the highest possible pleasure that's available. So that was my decision. Now, in making that decision, does that mean I'm not doing any practical activities in this world? No, doesn't mean that at all. It just means that I'm using the matter of this world to get the highest purpose, the highest pleasure. And that highest pleasure can't be material because matter has problems in it for us. It's temporary. It's transitory. And as long as we are seeking pleasure from matter, we'll be in anxiety because you just can't get your hands on it long enough. It's changing, it's dying, it's disappearing in one form or another. So this produces the anxiety, and then our minds become so turbulent, and we become so mentally dissatisfied. I can't get any lasting pleasure. So I began to meditate on these points and decided that Rather than a corporate career, I wanted to explore the realm of the highest possibilities for pleasure, learn them myself, and teach others these things. So I've been doing that for 30 years now, and 25 of those 30 years I've been traveling on every continent of the world. And I can see, as the decades roll by, that people are suffering in the same old ways. Suffering through ignorance. Even those who are materially comfortable in terms of their body, in terms of their wealth and assets, they're not mentally comfortable. And therefore they go through so much anxiety because of this poverty of the inner life. Now, the only way we're going to counteract that poverty of inner life is if we get a strong experience of our non-material identity. In my research on every continent of the world I've done research, and all the ancient civilizations, I have not found any technique more powerful for tapping into our spiritual identity and spiritual pleasure than the Hare Krishna mantra. Therefore, both through study and experience, I recommend that to everyone. But most persons are not just about to do some kind of mantra meditation without some deep knowledge. Therefore, I recommend that you, in addition to your material duties and obligations, supplement your material studies with spiritual studies, transcendental studies, Krishna conscious studies, so that you can deal with your individual consciousness and the supreme consciousness and see, is there a relationship between the individual consciousness and the supreme consciousness? And perhaps within that relationship between the individual consciousness and the supreme consciousness, there lies real pleasure. Once you start getting into this spiritual pleasure, then you can deal with the whole process of taking birth and dying. You see, I'll give you one last point. For those of you who are curious about reincarnation, or as it's more technically known, the transmigration of the soul. Because the mind has its desires and is not satisfied, you have to take birth again to try and satisfy those mental desires. So if you can stop the mind from its cravings, then the soul does not take another material body. You cannot simply repress the mind, though. You have to give it something superior that it can occupy itself with. You can't just clamp down yourself and say, I'm not going to desire, I'm not going to think, I'm not going to be attracted to anything, I'm going to conserve all my mental energies, and that's it. I'll just be without desire, I'll just be without being attracted to anything. It doesn't work. You can try it. Just like you can't keep a little kid sitting in a corner as a punishment all day long, similarly you can't bottle up your own mind and just be inactive. You have to find the superior thing for your mind to be absorbed in. So, I'm presenting that the most powerful thing your mind can be absorbed in, as described in the ancient text Bhagavad Gita, is Krishna consciousness. The superior pleasure of the spiritual realm. That's what the mind should be absorbed in. And then automatically the mind becomes under control, it becomes your best friend, it doesn't bother you. You use something superior to control something inferior. That is the secret technique of Krishna conscious yoga. Not that you try to battle it out with the mind on its own terms, on its own level. Fighting matter with matter will not win. You've got to rise above the matter with anti-material knowledge and experience, with spiritual knowledge and experience, and then the mind easily becomes under control. And then if you want to get into the whole thing about reincarnation, you can stop the cycle of repeated birth and death because no longer do you have material expectations. Because of material expectations, we take one body after another and try to satisfy ourselves physically and mentally. But if you no longer have these material expectations, if you have developed spiritual aspirations, then there's no reason for you to take another body of matter. You can do this while working, while studying. Simply, we have to understand what our priorities are. That would be the last point I make. What is the number one priority in your life? Actually, everyone wants pleasure. So you have to make the number one priority in your life how to get the best kind of pleasure all the time. You can't say, well, the number one goal in my life is to study or to work. That's actually not true. You're seeing those things as a way to get pleasure. So if you instead make the number one priority in your life to get the highest and best possible pleasure at every moment, then you can start to manage and adjust your lifestyle. So that's what I recommend. Put first things first. Go about your practical duties. I mean, after all, you do have this body, even though it's not you. You do have the mind, even though it's not you. You've got to take care of those things. You've got to have physical health, and you've got to have mental health. But those are not the most important things. If you have the spiritual health, if you have Krishna consciousness, then you won't suffer mentally. You won't suffer physically because you'll understand. The mind and body are just coverings. They're not me. I have to take care of them, just like I take care of a car, but I'm not the car. And this way, I'm giving you an introduction to the dynamics of the mind and how you can get beyond the mental platform by stepping onto the spiritual platform of Krishna consciousness, by learning about the individual consciousness and the supreme consciousness and what the two can generate together. That is called Krishna consciousness. So I'll stop here and I'll ask you if you maybe have some questions. Whatever. Analytical understanding for walking into the laboratory and making an experiment upon myself. Some people are not as skeptical and cynical as I was. I was a New Yorker. If you know anything about New Yorkers, they think they're, the greatest gift to the world. And just like I noticed in Australia, the number plates on the cars, they all have different mottos for each state. What's for Victoria? That's what it is? So New York's motto on the number plates is the Empire State. So that's the attitude of New Yorkers. So I was like that. I'm not going for this kind of strange stuff. I had to find out what it's all about first. So that's the approach I took. Others aren't so jaded. They haven't been so jaded and cynical as I was. So they just say, okay, I've got nothing to lose. I'll try this Hare Krishna mantra meditation and see what happens. So either way is good. So that is a practical way you can go about it. You can do both. You can study these ancient texts. We have made them available. Or you can directly take to the Hare Krishna mantra meditation.